Okay, so I'm going to say hello and welcome to Surrogacy Australia's webinar. My name is Anna Mackay and I birthed as an altruistic surrogate 1 year ago. Tonight, my co-host is Erinna from the Gold Coast. Erinna's been around the surrogacy community for 6 years now. Both of us actually went out of our way to be surrogates for strangers. Erinna joined the Facebook community, ASC, which I'll tell you more about later, then connected with her IPs, Alison and Pearce. They then did surrogacy dating, completed paperwork, and got pregnant in their first embryo transfer. Erinna gave birth to a little boy, Sidney, in January 2017. Unfortunately, and as you have seen if you saw the social media posts where we mentioned this, when Sid was nearly 2 years old, Alison passed away from ongoing health issues, and health was part of her reason for needing a surrogate initially. Obviously, this is not how any surrogate or team imagines things panning out, and we can discuss that in more depth with Erinna later. I guess tonight we're here to celebrate their surrogacy journey, to reflect on those teachable moments, and to answer any questions that you've got for either of us a little bit later on. So welcome, Erinna, and thank you for joining us.
Hello, thank you.
We've got one photo here, pregnant at your baby shower in the 30 weeks of pregnancy with intended mum, Alison. But as we said before, there's a lot in a journey before you get to that point. So I'm just going to stop the share for a minute so that we get a bigger picture of Erinna, so you're not just in people's corner. So Erinna, tell us a little bit about us. So what brought you to surrogacy in the first place to then go out looking for strangers to carry for?
Well, initially I had my first child and the pregnancy was quite easy. The birth was relatively quick and easy. And I thought, oh, I could do this for someone else. I'd watched a few shows about surrogacy overseas. I think there was a one in the UK and a few. I didn't really know if it was legal or not in Australia at that point, but I was like, oh, that's maybe a thing. But kind of didn't really think about it much. And then we had our third child, Caden, and he passed away when he was 11 months old. So
that was from SIDS, was it?
Yeah, he died from SIDS, which was obviously really, really hard.
Of course.
But it also made me think, wow, there are people out there that have lost a baby, during pregnancy or in infancy, who don't have any living children, who don't have, because we still had our two older sons.
Yep.
And that thought, and also this kind of need in me to do something like positive kind of out of that, kind of led me to kind of look into it more. So that was when I joined. So it was about a year after he passed. I just Googled Australian surrogacy and found the Fertility Connections forum.
Yep.
And then from there found the ASC Facebook page. And just kind of started asking questions and chatting to people. I was considering being a surrogate for an extended family member.
Yeah.
And kind of chatted to them a little bit about that. They ultimately decided a few weeks later that they weren't going to pursue surrogacy. They'd kind of already come to terms with the fact that they weren't going to have children, and and just decided that that was kind of where they wanted to go.
It's a little bit like when IPs need a surrogate, they tell their friends and family and get the conversations happening. You wanted to be a surrogate, so you were sort of going, I wonder if anybody in my circle first of all needs me before I go out and see if I can find a stranger or not. So that sounds like what you did there to test the waters.
Yeah. So that were kind of the only people I could think of that I knew that had tried for a baby for some years and hadn't been successful.
And I remember I asked a friend who'd been through IVF. I knew she didn't need a surrogate, but I'm thinking, I wonder if she's got any friends in her IVF circle, or she'd had twins, and maybe, in other groups, you're spreading the word about it, aren't we? So, so then you know, we're in part of the Facebook groups, and I guess, you know, back in the days where attending in-person catch-ups was very easy. and a special welcome to anybody tonight in, I guess, Melbourne and Sydney in lockdowns. I hope it's nice to join us and see some faces. So did you initially meet Alison and Pearce in person first, or online first?
No, online first.
Yeah.
So I posted like an introduction post in ASC, and Alison commented on that, but it was a pretty short little comment just saying, "Hi, welcome to the group," like something like that. And then her previous surrogate, so they'd been on a journey before me, but that pregnancy ended. That baby had some congenital abnormalities that were incompatible with life.
Yeah.
So that pregnancy unfortunately didn't go ahead.
Yeah.
And their previous surrogate had decided that after that she'd kind of had enough, or at least needed a break. So that she wasn't going to try again for them, at least for a while.
Yeah. So they put themselves out
there. So their previous surrogate contacted me. She messaged me and said, "Hi, like, this is who I am, and this is who my intended parents are, and this is kind of our story." And she said, "Alison commented on your post. You know, would you be interested in chatting to her?" So I messaged Alison and said, "Hey, your surrogate chatted to me. Hello." And kind of just started chatting from there.
Yep. For any IPs listening, you know, this probably sounds like high school or dating, or, you know, young adults, and that's exactly how it often works in this community, is that it's a connection. So another surrogate put you in touch. I mean, obviously she had quite a close connection to them, but just shows that we do need to be chatting to lots of different people, because you just never know who's going to almost be a matchmaker, if you like, there. So then you chatted and met and got to know each other. Do you roughly remember from that first message, roughly then, how long it took to chat together and do some appointments and get pregnant?
I think it was 4 months until we'd met up in person twice and spent a lot of time messaging when I offered to be their surrogate. And then we started the process, I think, 2 months later, with the fertility specialist and the legals and the counselling and all of that. And then how much longer would that have been?
It becomes a blur looking back now, doesn't
it? Yeah, it's like all the maths there. It's like, hang on a minute. So I think it was 8 months between when we first started chatting and when I was pregnant.
Yep.
Which is pretty short. The Queensland process is a little bit easier than some other states, though.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I think we'd say 6 to 12 months, you know, would be about an average sort of thing. And then pregnant first go. And yes, so that worked well. So that might bring me back. I'm going to go back to these photos now. How many? I think it's this one. Did that work?
Yeah. There we
go. Good. So then, and how was the pregnancy? As you said, you seem to enjoy being pregnant and birth, and that seemed to be okay. Did that end up being the case with Surrobub?
We did have some issues. I'd had SPD, symphysis pubic dysfunction, in previous pregnancies, but I got it a lot earlier in this one than I had in previous ones. So it started at 16 weeks.
So it's a lot of pelvic pain.
Yeah, a lot of pelvic pain. Basically feels like someone's stabbed you in your pelvis.
Oh, yep.
And be very sharp and very kind of intense pain. But fortunately that doesn't last for very long.
But tough going when it lasts.
Yeah, but it's not very much fun.
No, it's the things that women put our bodies through, hey, to help. But I mean, we understand, but and I guess the IPs do what they can and just there to listen, and when you vent. about it all. So did they, how far apart did you live?
So they live about 45 minutes away in good traffic.
Yep.
Because they live on the south side of Brisbane and I live on the Gold Coast.
Yep.
The motorway that runs between us can be really, really good or really, really terrible.
Yep.
So there are times when it's taken me nearly 3 hours to get home from their house.
Okay, unexpected, yes.
Yeah.
So still,
yeah, so they weren't super close, but not too far away.
Yeah, so you could plan, you know, and they were attending most of those major appointments, I'd imagine, during the pregnancy too.
Yeah. Alison tried to get to most of my appointments. There were occasionally ones that were booked at short notice, or she had a day when she was in theatre. She was a radiographer that worked with the team that does deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's disease.
Wow, right.
Yeah, so there were some days where she just couldn't get away from work.
Yeah.
But she made a real effort to come to as many as she could.
Wonderful. So then I think the next photo here is birth. And so I guess sometimes for brand new IPs listening, sometimes they wonder, are we at the birth? Do we get to be a part of the birth? So it sounds like, I mean, you're so comfortable with them by this point in time, I'd imagine, that they're supporting you in lots of different ways. And that's your husband there too, obviously.
Yeah.
Putting an ice pack on your back or a heat pack? Or
a heat pack, yeah.
Heat pack, yep. And so we'll just skip through a couple of these here. Their faces tell it all, don't they, in some ways? They're excited but nervous. And you remember that these photos bring up feelings or thoughts for you?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this, like I wasn't kind of aware of at the time because I was just kind of focused on myself, on what I was feeling and the birth process. So these photos are really great because I never would have seen like most of those facial expressions and the kind of emotions that were happening for them. So I love these photos. Yeah.
So everyone listening, plan on that. And this one here is like almost like, if I had to like rank a top 5, this next one is, I mean, the emotion, the release there, and it, you know, how do you capture surrogacy in a photo? Usually the woman holding the baby has birthed the baby. But the woman holding that baby, if you think about where that umbilical cord's going, that's going to you.
Yes.
So has this become a favourite photo of yours?
It is. It's one of my favourites. Just seeing the emotion on both of their faces, and little Sidney there, kind of face all screwed up because he's just come out.
Yep.
Yeah, it's so beautiful.
And this one here, that's the one I had front and centre.
Yeah.
Did she say something to you there, or just?
There weren't any words. It was just this look, and I could just tell that it was just gratitude and like thankfulness.
Proud of you.
Yeah, it was really sweet, and I love that moment so much because it feels like it encapsulates our journey a lot of the time. Like it was mainly about the two of us. Like our husbands were there to support, and they were really great, but it was like mainly about the two of us. Yes.
And again here I remember having my hand on, you know, one of my IPs once Bubs was born, and I think I hear that in hetero couples, often the surrogate and the intended mum bond quite closely, almost a sisterly bond in some ways, that you're sharing your pregnancy with her, and it's her pregnancy through you, I'd imagine. And
it's such an intimate process too, like the conversations that you have about menstrual cycles and hemorrhoids and all sorts of things that you wouldn't necessarily talk to like a casual friend about. So it's a very intimate process.
And it's a fast tracking of a friendship, sort of less than 2 years from, you know, first message to birth here, and how close that you become in that time. So but and it's a beautiful thing to do. And so then we've got here Sid's first birthday, I think you said to me in a message was. And catch up at a park with friends and family there, I'd imagine.
So it was a pretty big party. They had like, you know, extended family and friends, and like lots of kids running around. It was really lovely.
Yeah. And then this photo here, is it in someone's rumpus room or playroom or something? With is it a third or fourth birthday, you said?
His fourth birthday.
His fourth
yeah,
birthday.
So his birthday this year just gone.
The one just gone, yes.
Yeah.
So then I guess, so I've stopped that share now. I think it's just you and I, big versions now here. So obviously there's, in that last photo, there's someone missing. Alison passed away when a bit before Sid's second birthday.
Yeah. Yeah, so nearly 3 years ago now.
Yep.
Yeah, it was pretty unexpected. She had a heart condition, and that was the reason why she needed a surrogate. She wasn't infertile, but she'd been quite healthy for some time, and she was that kind of like miracle person who was still able to work full time, still kept active, had hobbies and things, and loved being a mum. Was quite an active mum with Sidney as well.
Yeah.
But she just had a turn, as Pearce said, and a few days later she passed away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not the journey that, or the happily ever after picture that you picture as a surrogate when you aim to carry for friends, or you go out of your way to find people to carry for. You're picturing making them both parents and watching them enjoy parenthood and all the ups and downs of parenthood that brings. And yes, of course, watching your little mate Sidney grow up, but also watching your friend Alison be a mum. So there's that part of your journey that doesn't continue, does it? It's I guess quite a lot of emotions. There's still joy there because Sidney's still around and there's still a friendship there, but it's different, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it's pretty complicated, actually. Like, obviously there's a lot of grief. Like, she was a really close friend, and I still miss her.
Yeah.
But it's also really great that there's a part of her that's here still.
Yeah, in her little man.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the story that he has, looking at this photo, this extended family that he has through you now. So yeah, so this is, it's tough, isn't it? And these are the realities of surrogacy, that life is fragile for all of us, everybody involved, and it's a serious thing that we embark upon in surrogacy. There's everybody's health, not just the baby. It's the surrogate and her family, and then the intended parents and moving on. So it is a scenario that happens, unfortunately, hopefully not often, but it has happened to your team, and that there's a sense of unfairness, but you wouldn't wish it on anyone, of course. So, and do they still live in the same house? Are you still that same distance apart now?
Yeah. So Pearce and Sidney still live in that house about 45 minutes away. Yeah. We don't see them as much as kind of we initially discussed kind of before the surrogacy. And I think, like, partly because that really close friendship was between me and Alison. So there's obviously a kind of different dynamic now that she's gone.
Yeah.
And also, particularly over the last few years with COVID and all the kind of craziness, and Pearce being a single dad who works full time, like, life gets really busy. It happens to us all, really, but even more so for him, kind of. Yeah.
Juggling everything in the house and his 4-year-old. So I'd imagine that if there's a main person that you have built the friendship with or the contact with, and they're out of the equation, it shifts things, and it's probably a slow burn process you can never fill in that gap, but to make that connection with Pearce and deepen that. And often it's women in a hetero couple. I don't know if in your own household, it's often the women that run the calendar, and schedule in all the catch-ups, and the husbands are grateful and they come along. But then if Alison's out of the equation, scheduling in those catch-ups might not be on the front of Pearce's mind. It's probably you initiating it most of the time, I'd imagine, which is trickier, isn't it?
And that's kind of how it's been, is me kind of initiating that. And there was a bit like I did have some feelings about that in the beginning, but I've just kind of like come to terms with the fact that it's going to be different because she's gone.
Yeah.
And just kind of getting used to that new friendship, that new dynamic without her there. Yeah.
Yeah. I often think, you know, like if you and I lived in the same city and we were to catch up for a coffee, one time I'd initiate the catch up, and then a month or so later you go, hey Anna, let's catch up, and you initiate it. There's often that even to and fro, but it probably sounds like now it's pretty much always going to be you driving it. And I'm sensing when you do catch up, it's fine.
Yeah.
But it's just you're the driver now, and sometimes you've got the energy and the capacity for that, and then I imagine other times you're a bit overwhelmed and going, I don't have the time. Just I wish it'd be different. Damn you, universe. So
yeah, but I've you know, come to accept that that's just kind of how it is now. So
what your team looks like,
and that's okay. Pearce is still like more than happy to catch up with us when he has time and when we have time and can get those calendars to match up.
Yes.
So yeah, no, that is good.
Yeah. So I mean, so we've got one question here, but I guess for anybody listening, it's a very unique experience that you're here tonight on this webinar, joining us with Erinna and this unique story that I'm not familiar of, you know, it happening very often, you know, in my 5 years. So, you know, I'm sure there's some takeaway, you know, moments from this all to reflect on for what type of journey that we want, and to embrace all the joy that along the way, because you might not sure how long it'll all last. But hopefully everybody to build these solid friendships so that there is, you know, a friendship between everybody there. So let's go to our first question, I guess, here tonight. I'll read it out. So an anonymous question: what does post-birth look like from IPs to surrogates? For example, what if there are complications after birth and the surrogate needs surgery or postnatal depression? Do they cover the costs? And how long after birth would IPs expect to care, or the costs for their lovely surrogate? Erinna, did your team have an agreement in terms of, like, did you have a debit card that was connected to their account and how long you might keep that for?
No, we didn't have a debit card. So I would just send them photos of receipts and things like that. Or if it was something that they could pay for up front, then I would get the bill sent to them or something like that.
Yeah. Did you have post-birth really complications, like a physio needed post-birth?
No. All my issues kind of disappeared with the birth. So without having that baby putting extra pressure on my pelvis and back, those things kind of cleared up on their own. So there was no issue there. The only specific thing we had with the date was the extra life insurance that they'd bought for me ran out 3 months post-birth. And we all decided that I hadn't had any issues. I'd been given it all clear from my healthcare providers. So we just kind of let that lapse.
Yep. So it was a moment to reflect as a team going, oh, that's lapsing at 3 months. Let's have a check-in. Are there issues? Then I'm sure they would have continued it. But because as a team you went, there's not. But it's not like they just let it lapse and didn't tell you. You had a conversation about it as a team.
We had a conversation.
But yeah,
apart from that, we didn't really discuss that much. We just kind of thought, like, if anything came up, then we'll have a conversation about it. And
there was enough trust there that you knew that they were good for it, so to speak. I can speak from my experience on the postnatal depression. I got slammed with it myself. We probably should have used a different counsellor for our mandatory, somebody that had much more experience in surrogacy. We had Katrina Hale as our ongoing counsellor. We should have had her at the beginning, and she would have unpacked my past struggles. So I had reassured them that if I would struggle post-birth, I'm an articulate woman. I'll let you know that if I'm struggling. But anybody that's been in anxiety, depression, and you're in the cloud, you can't speak up often at the time and articulate that you need help, or you don't want to be a burden. So that was tricky for us. So yeah, the dads, I mean, there was your body changes post-birth too. And so I needed in-between clothes as well before I, you know, got back to my normal size. So there was an agreement there for some costs. You know, up to 12 months post-birth could be reasonable, but as a team, you might have a check-in at 3-6 months. You know, if she had some ongoing physio or some pain, and she was having ongoing appointments. I guess the way to look at it would be as an IP, if the pregnancy was in your body and you'd had the baby and you're having these issues as a result of carrying that pregnancy, then it is reasonable to expect that there would be some care. But again, you don't want to, know how long is that an open door forever. You do want a little bit of planning. For me, once I then did a mental health care plan and went on antidepressants, as a team, we then agreed that I would have ongoing counselling up until 12 months post-birth. And so yesterday, I think, I had my 12-month just session with Katrina to round out the year. So because I'm on the mental health care plan, though, the dad's, a large portion of that was covered by Medicare. So they were just paying the gap. So I guess their last payment happened this week, 12 months post-birth. But that was all discussed. And surrogates don't want to cost you more money than they need to. So we want to buffer it as best we can for you. So Anonymous, I hope that answers that question for you. If you've got a more specific question, come back and ask it if you need a bit more detail. Erinna, you probably know the answer to this one. Is it possible for both the IPs and the surrogate to have the same lawyers if they live in the same area?
No. They need to be independent of each other. Yeah.
Why?
Well, the idea is that you want one lot of lawyers for the surrogate who is looking after her interests, and one lot of lawyers are looking after the IP's interests. And there's a potential for a conflict of interest if that person is the same person.
Yes, because I suppose they could be preferencing the IP or the surrogate and influence things in a particular way. So yeah, it's the law. That's how it works in Australia. 2 lawyers, the IPs start, the agreement gets drawn up, they send it to the surrogate's lawyer, and the surrogate speaks to her lawyer independently, and then it gets sent back and signed. But often lawyers who specialise in surrogacy work in pairs. So Sarah Jefford can do any state in Australia if you want to use her. But yeah, ask the community for pairs. So that's why they have to be separate for independent legal advice. That's the main reason there. People, I'm sure you've got some other questions. Remember, you can do this like you can't ask that style, because you can always click the anonymous button. If there's any question you'd like to ask either of us here, either about surrogacy generally or Erinna's journey herself, while they warm up to asking, mind you, we have hit an hour, so we won't be too much longer. Are there any other sort of takeaway moments that you'd like to pass on, Erinna? Some particular guidance that you often find you give other people, or some learnings?
I wanted to say a little bit more about the kind of post-birth kind of journey. We didn't have any like complications as such. I didn't get postnatal depression. There weren't any physical issues. But I did find sometimes asking to see the baby as much as I wanted to was a little bit awkward. Yeah. We hadn't really talked about like how I would see him. My IPs, like, you can see him as much as you want or as little as what, we'll have an open door policy. You can, whenever you like. But we hadn't really talked about how that was going to look. And
would you go to them or would they come to you, sort of thing?
Yeah.
Right.
And it turned out that they just kind of assumed that I would do all the travelling because I didn't have a small baby.
Sure.
But I was recovering from birth and was often quite tired. And
still navigating your own 2 lads.
Yeah. And I had a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old at that point. So not babies, but, I still had to be there for school pickup and that kind of thing. So there were like several kind of awkward conversations about how are we going to do this, because I really felt like I needed to see him quite regularly to kind of reassure my body and my brain that he was safe and he was happy.
Yep.
So I would encourage people to have those conversations in depth before the baby's born.
As in, what does it look like? Whose house? Whose? Yes. One little thing that we did is one of the dads, Matt, he was in charge of organising the next catch-up when we're in a catch-up. So I never wanted to finish a catch-up without knowing when the next one was coming. And so, we had a plan of every day for the first week, then the next week, every second day. But yeah, as you said, it was, and whose house and what time of day, who's the logistics there. Yes, and because, you've got a post-birth body to recover from too, which can be tired and bleeding for weeks. So, yep, that's some good advice there. And did you talk about how much contact in terms of messages and photos post-birth? Was that frequent and forthcoming?
We didn't really talk very much about that. I mean, Alison just kind of had a habit of, when she took a really cute photo or a really cool photo, she would just send it to me. Like, she'd send it to baby's grandparents and then send it to me as well. So sometimes that would be, every day. Sometimes it would be, once a week, just kind of whenever she did it. We didn't have anything specific, and that was okay. There were a couple of times when I wanted to see a new photo, so I would ask, but most of the time the kind of haphazard photos were enough.
Yeah, and you knew that you were part of that special group, like grandparents and stuff, that they were getting the photos, and so were you. So it's nice to feel that you're part of that special circle.
Yeah, and it was just something that happened. It didn't feel kind of like forced, like she knew that, every Monday and every Thursday she had to send a photo or anything. It was just kind of when she thought of it.
Great. Yeah. So there's spontaneity there. So
yeah.
If you've got time, look, the questions they've finally warmed up for us. So good work, team. We'll go to, I saw Kate's come through first, which said, how did you offer to be a surrogate?
My offer was quite boring. Since then, I've seen all these people do these really fun surprises and messages and presents and things. I didn't do anything like that. I had a bit of a timeline in terms of when I wanted to become pregnant by, and I'm not super creative in terms of surprises and things like that. So mine was a text message. We'd had our second face-to-face catch-up, and we'd been chatting for about 4 months online as well. And at that second catch-up, we'd kind of talked about a lot of the more difficult things in terms of, our ideas about termination, what kind of birth I wanted, did I want to express after the baby was born? Like, a lot of those things that can be a little bit difficult to talk about, but that are really necessary to talk about before you become a team. And so because we were like pretty much on the same page with all of those things, I just sent her a message saying, I've, had a talk to Chris, my husband, and we both really like you. There's no issues. Like, we'd like to have a baby for you. And that was like pretty much it.
Good. Yeah. And that's all it really needs to be at the end of the day. So I'll just add in my story then, or my little advice is that, I guess, so yeah, you guys were dating. So for me, the second time I met them, but lots of messages in between, I said to them, I'm offering to be your surrogate, but I'm offering to date you. I want to get to know you for 6 months before we start any of the paperwork. And so let's have these date nights where we catch up. So because then I didn't want them going off looking for another surrogate, and I didn't want to go off looking for other IP. So I wanted to be exclusive in that sense. So I wanted them to know that. And then about 6 months later, I was ready, and we actually did an escape room, like an adventure room. And I had a little thing planned when we escaped the room. So that was my thing. I think we're answering some of the questions as we go here. Anonymous, what if you start chatting to IPs and you don't click? It could be awkward to end that relationship, and you're worried about getting IPs' hopes up. You're right. That I'm just going to click that we've answered those ones. That but it is like dating, isn't it? If you meet a life partner, a person that you think could be a life partner, and then they're not, you don't owe them. You wouldn't stay together in a relationship because you're worried about getting their hopes up or hurting them. We don't owe anybody a baby, and they've got to be people that you're going to be friends with for life. So have you got any suggestions on that, Erinna, to somebody that's worried about hurting people's feelings, I guess?
I haven't been in that position. was chatting to 3 sets of IPs, but it just kind of naturally turned out that there was one set that weren't ready, didn't have the same timeline as me, and there was another set who had some family issues come up in the meantime, and that they couldn't continue at that point. So, and then Alison and Pearce, just, it was so easy with them. They felt like kind of family from as soon as we met them. Like it seemed like a no-brainer.
Good.
So
trust your gut instinct in that sense.
Yeah,
it's got to feel easy.
Yeah, that's it. I think if you've got to force it, then yeah, they're maybe not the right ones.
Yeah, so it could be a tough conversation, but it needs to be had, and do it gently, and imagine you're in their shoes. Yeah, they're tricky conversations. We're not going to lie to you, they are tricky to have.
But
so
yeah, just be honest and kind, I think, when you have to have those conversations.
And thank them, you know, for the friendship that you have built, and maybe you might be able to be friends and support each other on a journey. So
yeah,
I'll jump around a little bit, but what happens if something happens to the IPs while you're pregnant? If, like, worst case, in case they split or pass away. These are all talked about in counselling. That's something your team talked about, Erinna, in counselling. What would happen?
Yeah. So we discussed it a few times on our own, and then again in counselling, and they had basically said that it would be the same as if the child were already there. So if they were to split up while I was pregnant, then they would organise a custody arrangement after the baby was born, and it would be just the same as if they'd divorced years down the track.
Yeah.
And then pretty much the same thing if one or both of them died. Like, they had wills, and the baby would either go to the living parent if they were still alive, or if both passed, then they had, I think it was, well, I'm not sure. There was a family member that had said that they would step up anyway.
Yes.
So yeah.
And for us, it was that was the impetus for us to make sure I had the mobile numbers of the 2 grandmas. So I'd met them, but it made us go, oh, so although the grandmas might not necessarily be the one to raise the baby, they would help facilitate it. So surrogates don't want to be carers of the baby. I'm sure we would all help to make sure baby goes into someone's care, of course, and we'd still want to be connected. But yeah, all of that stuff is talked about in counselling. Bobby, lovely to have you here, asks us, as surrogates and with the benefit of hindsight, do you have any things you'd probably do differently with IPs? Which I might tie into the question that Kate's asked, what's the best and the worst part of being a surrogate, and what would you do differently, therefore?
Oh, that's a big question. The best part was, there's so many, like the amazing relationship that I built with them and that I now have with Sidney, as well as their extended families. Like, I hadn't really thought of grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, like that kind of thing. But when I was 12 weeks pregnant, my IPs had a barbecue, and they invited the baby's grandparents and kind of all those close family and friends. And it was really touching to see everyone and how grateful they were to me for carrying their grandson or family member. And yeah, because it wasn't something that I really thought about, I was like, wow, it's not just about them, like it's kind of about everyone else as well. So that was really beautiful.
It's the village. You got to see the village that he was going to be a part of when he grew up.
Yeah, and I've still seen them at birthday parties and various things. Alison's mum still sends me birthday presents every year. Yeah, so they're that was a really kind of surprising, kind of positive from the surrogacy. Yeah. Worst things.
Sounds like navigating the post-birth initially.
Yeah.
At the time, it's intense, isn't it? And it's a big deal. You know, we're years past it now, but it's hard.
It is, like, even when it's pretty easy, like even when you have a great relationship like I did with my IPs, and even when you don't have any complications or postnatal depression, it's still rough. You still have those hormonal kind of ups and downs, that roller coaster. You still have that kind of need, or at least I did, to see the baby regularly and make sure that he was okay. And then I could kind of go, like, it's all right. And there'd be like a bit of relief there. Yeah, so kind of navigating how that was all going to work. And, you know, would they reimburse me for some of my travel? Because I did do a vast majority of the traveling, at least in those first kind of few weeks. Yeah, and the awkward discussions about money, like that was difficult. And there's all these little things that kind of came up, and I was like, is this a surrogacy expense? Is it not? And I know some surrogates are like happy to absorb some of those costs, but for us, we couldn't really, because my husband was studying full-time and I was working part-time. So our budget was pretty tight at that time. So we kind of needed to watch all those little pennies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's nice to have a bit more buffer and to know what's reasonable. And so sometimes trying to find ways, and like SASS, we've written down those list of expenses, and I've created like ranges and averages. And so that, the teams might have a joint spreadsheet, for example. My husband was like we're both maths teachers. And so having that spreadsheet that we could all refer to took some of that emotion out of that. For example, I don't know if you had a similar one, like as a team, we'd estimated, how much I might need on maternity clothing, and particularly bras can be quite expensive. And that when, I then needed some at a couple of different points in time, I could look back at that and go, as a team, we'd estimated this many hundreds. I've only spent this. I now don't feel so bad if I'm going to spend more because we, as a team, planned for it. So, but those conversations, it feels like you're a little kid asking your parents for money, doesn't it? And it's a bit yuck. So did your team go okay on the whole, or there were some icky moments?
There were some awkward moments. It was mostly pretty good. And there were times where I was like, this isn't really a need, in that like I absolutely need this thing. It was like the dress that I'm wearing in the photo of the baby shower. I was like, I want to buy a new dress because I kind of don't have any nice maternity dresses except for the one that I wore to my third son's baby shower, and I felt awkward about wearing that to the new baby's one. And she was like, oh no, that's fine, like we thought you might want to buy a new thing for the baby shower anyway, because we'll be taking photos and you want to look nice because it's a big party with lots of people. So a lot of times, even though there was that I don't really know if this is appropriate or not, we could mostly discuss it and kind of come to an agreement, which kind of made things easier.
But yes, money is awkward. Every team, I think, says that. I'm sure there's not one that ever does. So as we sort of wrap up here, and I will say to anybody, if they did need to duck out at any point in time, feel free to leave when you need to. We've got a last question here from James and Stu then, and thanking you for sharing your story with us. A question then, if they wanted to organise a surrogacy or IP catch-up in their state, how would they go about advertising that? And to Erinna, if you had your time again looking for IPs, would you have attended a face-to-face catch-up? You did though, but would you say that that's an important thing to do then?
I did really enjoy the catch-ups. There weren't any that were on kind of at the time when I was kind of actively looking for IPs. But I have enjoyed them since. Like I went to a few while I was pregnant, and I've been to a few since he was born as well. And it's really nice seeing people in person, because you're typing words on a keyboard. It's a bit more impersonal than like talking to someone face to face. And you get a really good kind of feel for what someone's like, I think, when you see each other in person. Like Alison and Pearce were pretty keen for us to meet up in person pretty quickly after we'd started chatting, because they'd had a couple of surrogates that they'd talked to, And they thought they got on quite well, but then they met in person and they were like, oh, it just doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
So they kind of wanted to do that early on before everyone got their hopes up, kind of thing. Yeah. So I think it is really important to catch up face to face, whether that's a big group catch up or just meeting someone for coffee. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good advice.
In terms of organising those catch ups, I've organised one. It's really something that you have to keep bumping. If you put it up in either your local group or the big ASC group, you need to keep bumping it, like reposting or commenting on your post about the catch up.
Yep.
Like a couple of weeks out, a week out, a couple of days out, and then like the day before, to keep it fresh in everyone's mind.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you'll get like hardly anyone turn up. So yes, that's my tip.
Yes. And yeah, my tip to that, when people do say they're going, maybe even message them privately and you can follow up with them if you want to. Doing an in-person one, doing it in your Facebook groups if you're in those state-based ones. And even if you start small, my advice would be, even if you find one other couple to meet with a coffee and then, or meal, and then you've met them. And then the next time around, you might bring in some others, but then you already know somebody. So it doesn't have to be big, because then sometimes you've got the opportunity to be let down if not many people come. Sometimes it's better to go small and build up a network there. Funnily enough, in the next day or so, we're announcing something that we are doing. Surrogacy Australia is going to be running monthly Zoom catch-ups on a Friday night, hosted by Lisa and Henry Leggett. We had a trial run last week. So they're nationwide. So anybody can join them, and we're going to make that a regular thing. So you've got that to look forward to, that you're welcome to attend, James and Stu. And it'll be interesting to see how many people come to that. And again, so that you might have been messaging people like Erinna was saying, but then even Zooms are something in between, isn't it? To get tone of voice and see people. And we, in our trial run, we did some breakout rooms so that you can get a chance, if there's 20 screens that are attending, 20 couples and some surrogates too, it's very hard to talk to everybody. So we've been practicing some breakout rooms so that you get a chance to chat in small groups. So yeah, so James, you might do an in-person one, or you might organise a Zoom one as well. So I hope that helps. So before we wrap up then, Erinna, any last minute thoughts or parting advice?
No, I think we covered everything that I would have actively wanted to share with everyone. So yeah, just thank you all for listening and for having me.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing your story. We really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
We can always have you back another time. So I'll sum up by saying, so thank you for joining us, and we hope you found this webinar useful. The next webinar will be next Wednesday night. I've got the date written on my script here, but it's wrong. It says the 14th of July. So whatever the date next Wednesday is, and we have Hannah joining us. Actually, Hannah was one of the ones in those photos that I showed you. So she's a single mum, and is still a single mum. And so that's really valuable insight to hear from her. And her daughter Imara is, I think, 2 now. So life after surrogacy. And she's hoping to do a sibling journey in the future too. So that is more focused to IPs, but anybody's still welcome to join and to ask questions, of course. And for anybody that's a regular, I know James and Stu, feel free to miss out the first half an hour if you've been to webinars before in that information session, and come in half an hour when the co-host starts to share their story. That's absolutely fine. If you've still got lots of unanswered questions or would like them answered privately, consider joining SASS to be connected with a mentor and to have your questions answered then in a one-on-one setting. I like to say, let's change the world one conversation at a time, so that we can educate more people about how surrogacy works in Australia. It can be very lonely and overwhelming in the beginning, but there's plenty of support in the village if you go looking for it. And as the saying goes, it takes a village to raise a child, and in the case of surrogacy, it takes a village to make a child. So welcome to the village, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and good night, everyone. Thanks for joining us, Erinna.
Thank you. See you later.
Good night, everyone.